Hello everyone, I'm Larwan Berke, a third-year PhD student in computing at RIT, and I will explain our research on methods of evaluation of imperfect captioning tools by deaf and hard of hearing users at different reading literacy levels. There are approximately 30 million people who are deaf and hard of hearing in the US, and I am one of them. Deaf individuals typically struggle if they need to communicate through oral means. How does the deaf community communicate with each other? Many use their own native language, American Sign Language. There is also other methods of communication which utilize the written English language, emails, or texting. In person, interpreting is the preferred mode of communication for the deaf community interacting with hearing people. There's a limited number of certified interpreters, which is a resource availability problem. Deaf individuals have to plan ahead in order to schedule interpreters. The last-minute requests typically are not possible to fulfill. Furthermore, there's a monetary aspect to the issue which prevents organizations from hiring unlimited interpreters. How can we solve this problem of availability and cost? So far, many researchers believe they have found a promising solution, which is automatic speech recognition. ASR technologies have experienced tremendous growth lately. Many deaf people already carry smartphones and tablets and laptops with them, and with an internet connection to the cloud, it seems like the problem of availability and cost has been solved. Is ASR ready for widespread use in the deaf community? I know that many in the audience might have experienced ASR errors and can agree with me that ASR isn't perfect. As you can see, the automatic captioning in this example is incomprehensible.
That drama, alternate role model, and vodka substrate right now, no, I don't know what you...
Of course, ASR has experienced recent leaps in quality, but there will always be a complex real-world audio environments that will pose new challenges for its use. We wanted to know whether ASR with such errors in this text may still be useful to deaf users as captions. Interested parties such as universities, governments, and companies might view ASR as a method to save resources and costs when compared to human interpreters. But we have to be careful. We need solid evidence before deciding that these systems are good enough to use for captioning services. Is imperfect ASL considered equal to interpreters? We don't know. Studies have shown that the deaf community is receptive to the idea of using ASR tools as they gain autonomy and is able to communicate in situations where interpreters are unavailable. However, when asked if they are willing to use ASR in lieu of interpreting, their attitude immediately changed and they were resistant to the idea of using ASR. It's important to consider how researchers have evaluated ASR systems with deaf individuals in prior studies. However, we found greater availability how prior researchers elicited deaf participants' opinion of the quality of ASR captions and used probes such as open-ended questions on the quality of captioning. Scalar responses questions use such usefulness, understandability, and caption accuracy. Comprehension questions to measure the amount of information retained by the participants, such as open-ended, fill-in-the-blank, and multiple choice. We also did not find prior methodological research on the effectiveness of these probes at measuring caption quality among these users. Another concern was that most prior students did not report the English literacy levels of their participants, and there was great diversity in the literacy level among the deaf community. This is a concern not only because the question probes are typically presented in English, but also because the prior research at our lab on another topic, we found that when you ask deaf participants to critique imperfect videos of American Sign Language, the participants with the higher ASL skills were more critical judges. It is unknown whether something similar might also be true when asking deaf participants to evaluate imperfect English captions. Without data on participants' literacy, it is impossible to compare the results from different studies. Also, those studies utilize a variety of probes to ask participants their opinion on the quality of captioning, none which have been shown to be optimal when considering the literacy levels of the participants. Our team decided to investigate this evaluation problem and formulated two research questions. Question 1. If we compare participants' responses scores over captions of different quality levels, we will observe significant differences between their scores for captions at each quality level. We refer to this as discriminative ability of the probe. Question 2, if we compare the scores from participants at different literacy levels, we will observe significant differences in the responses from participants at each literacy level. We refer to this as literacy bias of the probe. Shown on this slide is a list of several probes we investigated in this study, which included a variety of types such as Boolean, Likert, ordinal scales, and multiple choice comprehension quizzes. Our team picked these probes as they were easily to automatically score as compared to open-ended questions, for example. Let me give you a few examples of the probes participants replied to. A, did you notice any errors in the captions? Yes or no. C, the automatic speech recognition did a good job captioning what the speaker was saying. 5-point Likert. E, I would guess that the captioning accuracy is 0 to 100, where 100% means perfect. As for our studied methodology, we recruited 107 deaf participants with age ranging from 18 to 30. 48 women, 59 males participated, whom self-reported as 69 deaf, 36 hard of hearing, and 2 other. Approximately 20% of our participants have experienced ASR captions in the past, such as YouTube. What did the participants do? We first gave them a literacy test, which would be discussed in a few slides. Then, those participated watched a video with ASR captions overlaid on the video, and then they viewed the video. Participants replied to our probes before moving on to the next video, and they watched 12 videos in total. Of course, with 7 probes, there are a lot of data to discuss, so I encourage you to read our paper to learn more about the results. I will let my co-author explain how we analyze this data. Please welcome Dr. Matt Huenerfauth.
Thanks, Larwan. So this study was basically a 2-factor design, with the within subjects factor being the quality level of the captions. So we prepared video stimuli that had captions at 3 different quality levels, which today I'll refer to as excellent, okay, and bad, with about a 5%, 15%, and 50% error rate. It's important to note that these captions were actually monotonically better, meaning that the worst captions, the bad ones, were produced automatically with ASR, with then errors corrected at random to produce the captions at the better levels of accuracy. The videos that we showed look like one side of a meeting that you might have with someone in a business setting, with the captions shown below. So in this particular example, a few of the words that are in the caption were incorrect, which is representative of what people would see in the study. The second factor was a between subjects factor of the literacy level of the individual participant. So this was measured using a tool called the Wide Range Achievement Test, which is a standardized measurement instrument. The participants in our study were grouped into 3 different literacy skill ranges, which today I'll just refer to as weak readers, moderate readers, and strong readers, with additional details on this in the paper. So before I show you a graph with some results, I'm going to show you a fake graph and tell you a little bit about how we can interpret some of the things I'll show you in a moment, because it's a bit counterintuitive. This is a methodological study. Normally when someone would do something like this, they'd actually want to evaluate whether the captions were any good. Well, we know that some captions were good and some were terrible. We made them that way. Instead, we're interested in knowing whether the individual questions were actually effective at measuring this difference. So in this example here, there's 3 different caption quality levels shown as the 3 different bars. And in this case, we see that responses to this hypothetical question were actually at different levels for each caption quality, and significantly so. So this would be an example of a question that would actually be effective at measuring this difference between the 3 levels of caption quality. In contrast, if we had results from a question instrument where everything kind of looked the same and you couldn't see any significant differences between things, we would decide that that question was not effective at being able to measure these differences. Of course, in a moment when I do show you some real results, I'm going to show you 3 graphs at a time. So I'll show you a graph that shows all of the data for all of the weak readers, all of the data for the moderate readers, and all of the data for the strong readers. And then we'll be able to see whether the instrument worked well for each of those different groups. All right, so let's look at some actual results. So this graph shows some results for this issue of the discriminative ability for one of the questions we used in the study. This one asked people to say, the caption accuracy was, and they picked one of 5 levels. In this particular case, we can notice that for the moderate readers in the study, we see that there were actually statistically significant differences measured between all 3 of the caption accuracy levels in the study. So this probe worked pretty effectively for that particular group. If you look at the strong literacy folks on the right side, we see that it was not quite as effective. It wasn't quite able to tell the difference between the 2 highest levels of caption quality, the 5% and the 15% error levels. And the results are even less effective if we turn our attention to the weak readers on the left side. It was really only able to tell the difference between the 2 extreme types. This was a pattern we noticed across the study. It was difficult to find probes that worked well for readers at the lower levels of literacy. The best we found was multiple choice comprehension questions about some facts that were communicated in the caption text. So in this particular case, if we focus on the weak literacy readers on the left side, we can see that this particular probe instrument was effective at telling the difference between the worst level captions and the other 2, but still wasn't able to tell the difference between the okay and the excellent level of captions. So our study did have 2 research questions. The second question was whether any of the questions that we had used actually had a literacy bias to them. Meaning, across the board, did folks who are at different literacy reading levels tend to answer differently to these questions? For example, maybe the folks who were the stronger readers just gave us worse scores all the time. Maybe they were more critical judges. The fake graph shown here shows what things might look like if you had a question that did not have a literacy bias. And you notice that the responses tend to be about the same across all 3 of the literacy levels. All right, so let's look at some real results. This is a question we mentioned before. The caption accuracy was, and 5 different levels. In this case, we notice that the strong literacy readers tended to give lower scores than the folks at the other 2 literacy levels in the study. So they really were more strict judges in this particular case. Looking at results from another question, this one was multiple choice comprehension questions about facts that were communicated in the text. We see a different trend, and it's one to be expected. And that is that folks who are at higher levels of literacy skill tended to have higher scores overall at the captions. So why is this interesting? Well, if you were conducting a study and you had a participant pool that happened to be at one of these different levels, and you simply just reported the comprehension question scores for your group, without also providing this literacy information, you really wouldn't know what was the cause of their response, whether it was just their different literacy levels. So the contributions of this study, in a lab study with 107 deaf and hard of hearing participants, we've evaluated a variety of question probes. I only mentioned 2 of them in the talk here, to measure how effective they are in user studies with deaf and hard of hearing participants evaluating captions. From this, we can recommend the following: that you really do need to select carefully the type of probe you're going to use based on the literacy level of the participants in your study. And we have a detailed table about this recommendation in the paper. Also, it is important to report the literacy level of your participants, especially for any of those probes that have this literacy bias. Some limitations: we only measured a particular genre of videos at a particular level of text complexity with a particular range of reading scores. So generalizing beyond this, we really need to do some additional studies. We're also got some ongoing work looking at alternatives to the word error rate metric that might be better measures of automatically evaluating accuracy of captions. And our research group is continuing more research in this area, and if we have additional methodological recommendations, we're going to document them too. So I'm going to thank my co-authors, Larwan Berke and Sushant Kafle, who are both PhD students at RIT. This work was supported by funding from Google, from the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, and from the National Science Foundation. And it was conducted at the Center for Accessibility and Inclusion Research at RIT. And we have some of the smiling faces of faculty and students there. And one other final thing, RIT is interested in growing our faculty in both HCI and accessibility over the next few years. So if you're interested in learning some more about that, come chat with me afterwards. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. So this particular session is being supported by our wonderful interpreters. So if you have a question, please come up and they will interpret the question for you so that we can have a Q&A session. Thank you. Take away.
Hi, thank you for the great talk. So I was curious, did you I don't know if you checked for it, you saw any correlation between their literacy level as well as the ASL exposure?
I'll answer that one. So we did not specifically investigate that in this study, but we did capture information about people's history and the age at which they did begin to use ASL. So we haven't analyzed that actually, but we do have that in our data set, so that's interesting.
Awesome, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, we can go for one more question. We can go for one more question. Go for it. Yeah.
David Fowler, University of Guelph. So is there one unit, one instrument that works well across the board? Or do we just have to be careful and read the paper and pick different instruments for different reading levels?
That's a great question. I think the challenge is looking at Likert and looking at where people are as far as trying to draw a parallel between collecting data and analyzing that data, and then from there we can decide our focus at what level are they operating from. So I think we can use a lot of resources and more studies, and after that we'll be able then to make broader research as far as success rates and where people are with their literacy.
Do you feel like there was one question that always worked?
No, and to answer that even further, the best way to describe this is to look at the literacy level and where they are and their understanding of the concept, and then from there we're able to draw a conclusion between both.
Okay, thanks. Great work.
Depending on literacy.
And give them a round of applause.